So let's talk about three quick topics. One, Mark Meadows' democracy-busting PowerPoint presentation. Two, the upcoming House Select Committee vote for Meadows for contempt of Congress. And three, why trying Mark Meadows' criminal case once he's indicted will be a prosecutorial walk in the park. Because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So we have a lot to unpack. We're going to start with this former Army colonel, a guy named Phil Waldron, who met with Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, 8 to 10 times in the run-up to the January 6th attack, discussing a PowerPoint presentation about how to overturn the presidential election. The title of the PowerPoint was Election Fraud, Foreign Interference, and Options for January 6th, but it could just as easily have been titled How to Overturn a Presidential Election for Dummies, because it was an anti-democracy treason fever dream. Here's how the Washington Post reported it. Election denier who circulated January 6 PowerPoint says he met with Meadows at the White House. A retired Army colonel who circulated a proposal to challenge the 2020 election, including by declaring a national emergency and seizing paper ballots, said that he visited the White House on multiple occasions after the election, spoke with President Donald Trump's chief of staff maybe 8 to 10 times, and briefed several members of Congress on the eve of the January 6th riot. Phil Waldron, the retired colonel, was working with Trump's outside lawyers and was part of a team that briefed the lawmakers on a PowerPoint presentation detailing options for January 6th, Waldron told the Washington Post. He said his contribution to the presentation focused on claims of foreign interference in the vote, as did his discussions with the White House. A version of the presentation made its way to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows on January 5th. That information surfaced publicly this week after the congressional committee investigating the insurrection released a letter that said Meadows had turned the document over to the committee. So it looks like Phil Waldron was also working with Donald Trump's other cruddy outside lawyers, Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, in a concerted effort to, overturn the results of a presidential election. And remember, this is after Donald Trump's own Attorney General Bill Barr said there is no fraud undermining Joe Biden's win. So this really is nothing but treasonous fantasy. Well, we'll be talking more, I'm sure, in the coming days regarding this PowerPoint presentation and Mark Meadows' role in what happened on January 6th. But let's turn now to the upcoming contempt of Congress vote for Mark Meadows for failing to appear and testify before the congressional committee. First of all, proving up a criminal case for contempt of Congress couldn't be easier. You know what it involves? It involves proving two things. That Mark Meadows received a lawful subpoena, which he did, and that Mark Meadows failed to appear at the appointed time, which he did. Ladies and gentlemen, the government rests its case. Remember a week or two ago when the Bannon case for contempt of Congress was up in court? Remember what the prosecutors said? They said, Judge, we need less than a day of trial time to prove up our case in chief. Friends, I maintain you can prove a contempt of Congress case on the first day of trial before the lunch break. Easy peasy. Then Mark Meadows will be free to present any bogus defense he chooses to present, right? You know it's going to be all about executive privilege. Let Mark Meadows claim he failed to show up because he had some, super overarching executive privilege that somehow says you don't have to show up on a subpoena. There's no such thing. But let's take the executive privilege claim on directly. First of all, executive privilege is for the current president to invoke or waive. Joe Biden has waived it. Mark Meadows has no executive privilege. Second, a trial court judge, Judge Tanya Chutkin, federal district court judge in D.C., has already ruled no executive privilege. Oh, and by the way, an appellate court just affirmed that ruling, saying there's no executive privilege. So Mark Meadows loses. By the way, Mark Meadows published a book and has gone on TV to hawk that book and has talked in great detail about his conversations with Donald Trump. You can't disclose information publicly and then claim it's privileged such that you can't talk about it before Congress. Mark Meadows has no executive privilege. Also, you can't use executive privilege to cover up crime. So all conversations with Donald Trump about overturning the election's results do not enjoy executive privilege. In how many ways does Mark Meadows' claim of executive privilege lose? Finally, if Mark Meadows really wanted to avoid a contempt of Congress charge, here's what he should have done. Shown up on the subpoena, answered all of the questions that don't arguably involve executive privilege. Like, Mark, you met with this guy named Phil Waldron, and he gave you a PowerPoint presentation about how to overturn the election. That doesn't conjure up notions of executive privilege with the president. That's why Mark Meadows had to appear, had to answer every question that had nothing to do with his even bogus claim of executive privilege, and then invoke privilege question by question. That's how you avoid being held in contempt. Mark Meadows didn't do that. He just thumbed his nose at Congress and said, I ain't coming. Let me finish with this. Mark Meadows gave an interview recently and he said, sure, I might have had this PowerPoint presentation, but I wasn't going to do anything with it. Really, Mark? I mean, that would be like Mark Meadows on trial for bank robbery, being caught red-handed with blueprints for the bank, the combination to the bank vault, a gun to be used in the bank robbery, a getaway car, and a bunch of big, empty burlap sacks with dollar signs on them, and Mark Meadows saying, but I wasn't going to do anything with them. Come on now, Mark. Folks, lots more to come every day. And we're going to stay on top of it together. Because justice matters. And as always, friends, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.